Okay, so introduction real quick. I am Dax, aka Space Mermaid. This is my panel on an introduction to retro game collecting. I have been collecting 5 years next month. And if any of you have any inkling already about collecting, you know that I started at the absolute worst time. Cool. So just a little bit of an introduction to my panel and how it's going to work. And about my collection. Something to note is that I am primarily a Nintendo collector, so I'm not as knowledgeable in anything Sega, PlayStation, or Xbox, or anything else. However, a lot of these concepts are, they're, cross-platform, because, I'll try and explain, but just remember that when I do say, so there's to be some things I talk about, I do try to specify like, hey, this is a very Nintendo focused section, but I will try to point out the things that are a bit more universal. I will say though, is that my one of my consoles that isn't a Nintendo console, really fun thing, it's called a Wonder Wizard. It is from 1974. There is zero information about it on the internet, and best as I can understand is that it's a Sears catalog knockoff of a Magnavox Odyssey. And the batteries came from 1974 as well. I had to rebuild those contacts. That was a really fun time, actually. Yeah, just to recap, I'm primarily a Nintendo collector. As a result, this is in fact going to have a Nintendo skew to it. I am still working on learning some of the others, but I tried collecting for a while, but I did not enjoy it. I'll talk about that later. And what was the other thing? Yes, the alternate title for this for this panel is Mistakes I Made When I Started to Collect and How to Avoid Them. So this panel is very much based on my experiences with my other friends who collect, and experiences from people that I've read about online. This is really to get you on the track to your own collection. So let's go over, first and foremost, what are we going over? We're going to ask the big question, what is retro game collecting? And some of you are not going to like the answer to which consoles I consider retro. Why should we collect, where to start, where to buy. I will talk about reproduction materials, Attack of the Clones, fixing your collections, and documenting and displaying collections. So what is retro game collecting? According to Wikipedia, it is the hobby of collecting and preserving video games, video game consoles, and related memorabilia. I feel like that's a pretty easily agreed upon definition. However, what is actually considered, don't use the spacebar apparently. What is actually considered retro? That kind of varies from person to person, because what you grew up with, you kind of have this little, it holds like a little box in your brain. And so it's like really hard to break in and be like, yep, this is retro now. Personally, I kind of consider the Wii and DS or older to be retro. The Wii and DS the Wii was my first home console. Game Boy Advance SP was my first handheld console. I kind of define it as being 2 or more generations old, because we have like 5 to 7 years between generations. So that means something that is 2 generations old is starting to get into the 15 to 20 year range. And that's a pretty well accepted date range. This also means that in a year's time, I will have to update this to say Wii U and 3DS. So, why collect? When you get started, I want you to ask yourself, what is your personal interest in collecting? It could be for nostalgic reasons. You want to rebuild your childhood collection, games that you just, you grew up and you loved, and don't always necessarily hit the same way when you're an adult, but that's not the point. Sometimes you collect from specific companies. I mentioned that I am primarily a Nintendo collector. My collection is almost exclusively Nintendo. Some people want to collect Sega. Some people want to collect the old Ataris, stuff like that. My friend is a big Sega person. Sometimes you want to collect a specific franchise. Personally, I have a goal to collect every Legend of Zelda game out there. Some people are big on the Mario games. Some people are big on Sonic, stuff like that. So maybe you're looking for a specific franchise. Some people do it because of an interest in preservation. I would say that's also a focus of mine. I check annually to make sure everything is in working order, and I make repairs as necessary. Preservation is really important to me because I will talk about emulators. I love emulators. They're amazing, but I think it is equally important to keep the original hardware functioning. And some people are interested in graded stuff. Graded is not my thing. I personally believe, they are games and they're meant to be played, but people have their own reasons. I do get a little frustrated when people use grading as a way to use video games as like an investment opportunity. This is kind of a huge cause in the boom that you have seen over the last several years over the prices in retro games. But if you want to go graded, I have no power to stop you. I just ask, please, for the love of God, do not use WATA games to grade your games. The people who know. If you don't know, I would look up Carl Jobst's YouTube video on WATA games. And that's about as political that one's going to get. Why collect? Define your collection goals. If you want to collect for an entire console, a really popular one is to collect every single Wii U game because there's 287 physical releases for that, and that's actually pretty reasonable to hit. Maybe you have like a star game, like once I have this game, my life will be complete. Don't stake your life's worth on one game, please. But maybe you really want to complete in box Earthbound or something like that. And I also mentioned franchise. Like if you want to collect for a franchise, it helps to kind of define, I want to collect this franchise. So where should you start? Number one, set a budget. Set a budget. It can be weekly, it can be monthly, it can be yearly. It is up to you. That's between you and your bank and your job. Do not go into debt for old games. I'm going to say that again. Do not go into debt for old games. I know you're thinking, I don't know if I'll have this opportunity again. I don't know if I'll find it at this price again. You will. Don't worry, you will. Well, I'll put a caveat there. If you find, if you do go to like some person's garage sale and find Chrono Trigger for $100, maybe, because that's a good deal. But other than that, do not go into debt for old games. Set goals. Goals are important, and start small. Don't go in trying to buy, every single console in one go. Maybe say, this month I'll buy one console, and next month I'll buy another console, something like that. Or whatever is within the reasonable amount that you can afford. Maybe it takes you 6 months to buy another console. Maybe it takes you a year. That's not the point. The point is keep it manageable. Consider recreations and modern consoles to start with. Like I said, I am a huge proponent. I love emulation. I think anybody who kind of goes between the hardware versus emulation, I don't think there's a war there. Some people act like there is. There's not. They go hand in hand. For recreations, I'm a big fan of the Retron. I have a Retron 5. I don't know if they've made another repro console since then. So, for example, that console will play NES, SNES, Sega Genesis, and both Game Boy Advance and original Game Boy games. So it's like a 5-in-1 console. It was like $150 to get that many consoles to play all those games individually. You would have had to put in $300 to $400, for example. So that's why I think recreations and modern consoles are a really great way to get into it. Hyperkin and similar companies. Also look into multi-carts. You might know it as an EverDrive. I think there's some other brands, but EverDrive is kind of the go-to. It's an emulation cartridge that has all of the ROMs on it. It's really fantastic way to get started, because you've got thousands of games for the price of, 2 to 10, depending on which expensive games you're looking at. Where to buy? I know this seems obvious, but it's, so here's where to buy. Build a time machine, go back to 2012, buy reasonably priced retro games. So that one doesn't really actually work, unfortunately. So here's where to actually buy video games. Go to your video game stores, and I'm saying your local video game stores. I've heard and I know that GameStop is allegedly going back to the retro video game market. Maybe avoid that. So when it comes to your local video game store, in my experience, there's kind of been two factors that you have to contend with, and that is price and availability. You get to choose one. Either your local video game store will have the game you want, but it will not be at the price you want, or it will have the game you want, or it won't have the game you want, but it will be at a good price when they do have it. If you build a good rapport with them, some do have an option to do maybe like a pick list, or they will hold games for a day or for a week or something after they post them on their website or Facebook page, Instagram, etc. My game store will do that for us, and it's really great. Another option is eBay. eBay is a little bit risky insofar as you can't actually test the games. There's no guarantee they work. But it is a really good way to get a large number of spare parts, because people sell lots of broken consoles. And, if you put them all together, 10 broken consoles might be 6 working consoles, stuff like that. Garage sales. Now, I do genuinely think the days of walking into a garage sale, walking out with 100 games for $50, I think those days are over. Everybody has the internet. It's pretty easy to look up how much a video game costs, but you never know. And flea markets. I personally don't really have a lot of good experience finding video games at a good price at flea markets. For reference, the flea market closest to me, I have seen people selling an original NES with no cords, no controller for about $120. Personally, I would not pay more than $25 to $30 for something with no cords, for that console with no cords and no controller. Basically, keep informed. This is my local video game store. This is in Florence, Kentucky, Nostalgic Video Games and Thrift Stores, and also they're next to a dentist. All right, Attack of the Clones. This is where it's going to get pretty heavy into Nintendo, but I will try to explain when there's some more universal things that you can look out for. And this is very focused on the games themselves, not the consoles. Nintendo has their seal, so all that stuff. Reproductions can be very good. They can be extremely convincing. Ideally, people will openly say, "Hey, this is a reproduction console." Some people suck. They exist. So use your resources, do a lot of research. Some of the things you can do is go to, for example, some of these video game stores, they will have 99% of the time they do checks for legitimacy. Usually that means either opening it and looking at the motherboard, looking for specific product codes, stuff like that. That's all very universal. Most games have some sort of product code on it. A very obvious example of that not being accurate is if it's a mismatch. Some of these signs vary by game and console, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So some of the universal signs might include if the picture on the label looks weird, looks wrong, maybe the colors are off. Now, that could mean that it got sat on the sun for too long, but it could also mean that somebody printed it up to try to trick you. I will say is that this is nowhere near as big of a problem as it sounds like it's going to be, but if it does happen, it's going to suck real bad. Because if you pay $150 for a Pokemon game to find out it's a $20 reproduction, you are not going to be happy. Whenever you can, check on a console. The gameplay itself can also be a huge indicator of a legitimate versus a counterfeit game or reproduction game. I don't want to call it counterfeit, reproduction. The following pictures, and I'm going to go over a couple of specific games from Nintendo consoles and what to look out for. They come from Nintendo Life. They're really good pictures, kind of explaining some of these discrepancies that show you if it's a reproduction game or not. So for a Nintendo DS game, there is a code on the front side, and it has this configuration. There's also a code on the back side, and it has this configuration. Couple of games, mostly Pokemon games, have a special black cartridge shell. If you hold it to the light, it looks almost clear purple. So this is an example of a real and a fake game. If you can see these numbers up here, the code on the front and back are incorrect on the fake one. So there's a discrepancy between the codes. A good way to find these codes is to ask your local community. Somebody might have a copy of that game and can tell you. There's also some effort to make kind of a database with these product codes from the legitimate games, so that way you can kind of take a look. Something to keep in mind is that some of these product codes will differ slightly with reprints. So again, be aware of that. Next one is this is an example of a discrepant label. It's a little harder to see, but the colors differ. See, this blue on the left is a little bit darker than this blue on the right. And the letters are a little bit more pixelated. You can see the pixels a little bit more. It's a really good indicator that it's a reproduced label. Here's an example of that purple backlit game. If you have a black cartridge, always hold it to the light. If it doesn't light up purple, it's probably not legit. This is almost exclusively Pokemon games. I don't collect Pokemon games because I haven't won the lottery yet. But if you collect Pokemon games, it's good to know. We'll do some Game Boy Advance games because that's one of my favorite ones to collect because that was my first handheld console. A Game Boy Advance game will always have the game logo, a Nintendo logo, the seal of quality, the rating, and the product number. The number is also stamped onto the label. You can also look at the motherboard. There are different product codes on the motherboard, and often, but not always, a Nintendo Nintendo logo. Also look out for batteries where there shouldn't be a battery, or vice versa. That's a very big indicator. That's a very big indicator of a reproduced game. And that's also anything that has a cartridge that is applicable to. So here are 4 examples. 1 example of a real and 3 fakes. So Golden Sun on the top left, it's got everything we need. It's got the Nintendo logo, the Nintendo seal. In the bottom right corner, you can see the product code, the game logo, and the rating. The Super Monkey Ball Jr., if you look at that and you thought that was legitimate, this might not be the hobby for you. No offense. As you can see, it is missing everything. It's, maybe it could have been scratched up, but I don't think that's even the game logo looks wonky. Bottom left, Power Rangers. This one's a very good reproduction, but it is missing the Nintendo logo. It has the Nintendo seal of quality, but it does not have the Nintendo logo. And in the bottom right, Mario Kart, it has the wrong seal of quality. Nintendo used to have a circle seal of quality that got simplified over time. Now it's an oval. It also has gotten simplified again. There's a list of roughly the time ranges in which they used each of the seals. So this has the circle seal, but by the time of the Game Boy Advance, they were using the oval seal. And Super Nintendo, I believe this is the last the last console that I'll go over these games for. There are product codes on the label and on the motherboard. and there's a Nintendo logo pressed into the back. So this is a real and a fake. Real is on the right, fake is on the left. Something to keep in mind with some of these games is that missing or peeling labels is not always an indicator that the game is illegitimate, because time happens, wear happens. So for example, for this fake one, yes, it doesn't have the Nintendo instructions, that sticker on the back that you see on the real one, but that is not always an indicator of a fake. However, the fact that it is missing the imprinted Nintendo logo in that little oval, that's how you know it's a fake. Also, just something I like to point out about the Super Nintendo in particular, they did actually, these are both legitimate copies of Super Mario World that I own. Partway through the console's life, they went from I call it the slope on the bottom, the slope style, to the ledge style on the top, because if you know these early Nintendo consoles, they had a really hard time with the games staying intact because of how they were designed. So the top version does not get stuck as often, long story short. All right, let's move on to fixing your collections. Stuff breaks and wears down. And if you don't play it for a while, if it has a battery, the battery might die. The battery might erode. Solder, solder needs resoldered at times. Always go for the common fixes first. If there's something wrong, if it's not starting, go from easiest to most complex and look it up. You can look it up on Reddit and YouTube. They are really amazing. And, local game shops, Facebook groups, stuff like that too. Really good resources. Common fixes, like start with cleaning it, then maybe see if there's something like a contact issue, because there's all of these cartridges have pins. It could be a contact issue. If it's a disc, it could be a scratch disc, stuff like that. And then go more complex from there. Sometimes it means that a battery needs replaced, which is very easy to do. That's a very good beginner solder project for this. I wouldn't even call it a project, but it's like a fix. So I recommend getting a set of tools specifically for it, and getting some 100% isopropyl alcohol for cleaning, because don't blow into them. Hopefully we all know that, but isopropyl cleans it without eroding it. For sets of tools, a lot of these have proprietary tools necessary to open them. Nintendo's really notorious for it because they've got the tri-wing, which is the bane of my existence. They've got those security screws. They've got all of that. If you run into I genuinely just recommend looking up toolkit for Nintendo consoles, toolkit for Sega consoles, stuff like that. That was the most helpful thing. You might find something for $15 to $20. I actually have 2 sets now because I keep losing the first set. When in doubt, ask a video game store. A lot of them either have an in-house repair guy, or they can, give you a number for somebody else who repairs. Not all of them will do repairs, but many will. Documenting your collection. This is a perpetual issue for me. It is very hard to find a good system, but you want to document your collection because you want to know what games and consoles you own. You don't want to be like me and returning Dr. Mario for the, I'm not kidding, 4th time because I keep forgetting that I already own it. It's also helpful to know the worth of your collection. Side note, if you're getting into collecting and you're trying to sell your collection and you're trying to get more out of it than what you put into it, that's not going to happen. Unfortunate, but it is helpful to know the worth of your collection. If it's big enough, might be for insurance purposes, might just because it's interesting to know, and also maybe for budgeting purposes. You can always type up a list. For a while, I was just using an Excel spreadsheet, and I was just having, each column be a different console, and then I just typed in what the games were on there. There's also some apps for it. What I use is I use Price Charting's tracker. Pricecharting.com is a pretty good starter resource for figuring out about how much a video game should be worth. It is based on active sales on eBay and other online other online resale groups. Or pages. However, if you go to somebody who's trying to sell a video game and say, well, price charting says this, they will laugh in your face. I would say maybe expect 10 to 20% more or less than what it says on there. And kind of figure that if you are the buyer, it's going to be worth less. But if you're the buyer, it's going to be a little bit more. And if you're the seller, it's going to be a little bit less. You know how, capitalism and whatnot. There's some other apps that I've looked at. I've looked at GameEye. I did not have a good experience with GameEye personally. I had it I had it delete my collection 3 times, and I've got 200 roughly items in my collection at this point. I can't type that all in every single time. That's too much. So, if anybody does know of a specific app that's geared for that and has a recommendation, loves it, please let me know because I'm always looking. But let me know after my next slide. And the most important part is displaying your collection, because if you're spending all this money, you better, show it off. This is a little bit of an older picture. I haven't really set up my collection in my new apartment yet. So this is an older picture of what was going on. But this is a picture of my collection circa 2 years ago. There's some consoles there that I don't have anymore, and there's some consoles I have now that aren't in this picture. But this is an IKEA Kallax shelf. It is a very good way to show off, because you can kind of have this nice little, little cubby for each one. They also do glass inserts and shelf inserts, so then you can double it up and have 2 in each of the. I changed over to a regular bookshelf. Some people use the curio cabinets. Go to whatever your favorite furniture store is and figure it out from there, basically. But yeah, show it off. I like bookshelves, and display cases are also popular. So this is the end of the PowerPoint portion of my panel. However, now we are at the first ask questions, and then also talk about any of your favorite games or goals for collecting. So let's start with questions. Yes. Okay, so the question is, it is about the repair section, and it is about the chip level. So you're asking for hardware reproduction at the chip level. Yes, that's a very good question, because I've had to try to look for that myself. I've been trying to repair a 3DS for a while, which has, because I need a new chip for the screen on top, or one of the screens. And specific websites, I wouldn't say there's a specific website. My go-to genuinely tends to be eBay. Most of my hardware replacement experience has been reshelling. I really love reshelling Game Boy Advance SPs. And so that's where I have gotten my shell hardware from. That is also where you can get that from. I would also recommend maybe looking into some of those for parts lots. If you find something for parts, it'll be a lot cheaper, and it may have the material you're looking for. Are you asking for a console or for a game in particular? Got it. So the specification is, what about for really, really older consoles, talking Commodore 64? That is beyond my expertise. Let's see here. Windows shirt. So the question was about whole set collecting, specifically maybe collecting a whole set of games. So for whole sets, sometimes you can get a deal on a full set. Other times you might have to pay extra for a full set. Typically, in my experience, when I've seen these get posted online and whatnot, these have typically been maybe somebody's getting out of collecting, or maybe a family member passed away and their collection is being sold off. If it is if it is within what you can afford, I think it's fantastic. Because then you kind of get to like check off a whole lot of boxes at once. And so does that kind of answer your question, or did you? Okay. Yeah. I saw you next on the side here. Sorry. Okay, so this is a fantastic conversation point. So you said you use old consoles and games. Oh, got it. So what this person does is they take game cartridges, they take out the insides and put an emulation cart inside. This is a really good, interesting question, because yes, at what point is it necessary to preserve every single game? At what point is it kind of those fluff games? Because I assume you're using like the $1.99. So yeah, it was 400 copies of Sesame 1, 2, 3 for 26 cents a pop. 25 cents. Oh, excuse me. That's a whole $4 that I got you off by. No, this is a fantastic point. So my personal opinion, I think that I think it's about what is being taken and what is being given. So for example, if somebody were to take a fully functional console, NES, and turn it into an art project, I see stuff like that sometimes. I won't lie, that would be an irritant to me. However, if they buy a 4 parts and just use the shell, it's already broken. So when you're talking about these, quite frankly, junk games of the past, I personally would not have a problem with that. It is a fantastic discussion to have. Since you're turning into an emulation cart, I would say you are putting more into the community than you are taking out. So I would not have a problem with what you have described. Now, if you tell me that you're taking copies of Castlevania, yeah, you're not a monster. They said they're not a monster. Yeah, basically, it's definitely a give or take. If somebody wanted those games, they wouldn't be 25 cents a piece. You are next. Yes. Yeah. So I actually talked about this earlier because the question was, what is my opinion on kind of these modern reproduction consoles like Hyperkin? I have a Retron 5. I use Hyperkin. I forget the other company that for reproduced controllers and stuff like that too. I love these things. I think they're fantastic for getting your foot wet. Or maybe you don't want to collect 5 consoles. Maybe you want to just have 1 console and play those games. They are a fantastic option. Definitely look at what other people think of how they play. And they also have really cool features, which is why I like them so much. So for example, a lot of these will automatically adapt the output for a non-cathode ray tube TV. So if you know why CRT TVs are so popular with gamers, it's because I got a nice little in the back. The reason they're so popular is because the art styles for these games back in the 80s and 90s, they were designed with cathode ray tube TVs in mind. And so they look really weird on like a modern TV. Some of these reproduction, specifically like Hyperkin, they will automatically update the graphics so that way they look a little bit smoother on a modern TV. Long story short, I think they're great. I think they're amazing. They're also an amazing resource for getting started. That was like the first thing I collected I got one of those so that way I could kind of buy a couple of games, see if I was actually into it, and then I went on from there. Yes. Yes, I've heard of these before. So the question is, you collect mostly, you said 64 and 64 games, and the question was, and in universal cases, the question was, do I know of any good resources for good quality reproduction labels? I have not needed to buy a label yet myself. However, I do know they exist. I know they exist on eBay and on Etsy, and sometimes some places have. And they will, print them out, ship them to you as stickers. Unfortunately, off the top of my head, I cannot tell you any, but I do know, I would say eBay and Etsy are the good place to start. Could you repeat that, please? Oh, okay. The question was, are there any of those reproduction consoles that have an N64 on it? N64 is a bit more complicated than the Nintendo, the NES, and the Super NES. I am not currently aware of any. I have not really looked either because I do have a N64 that functions very well at home. So I do not know, but have not looked. Let's go with you in the front. The question is most expensive item in my collection. Give me a second to think about it. I think it might be. It's one of my consoles, almost assuredly. It could either be my Fantastic Ice Blue N64 and matching controller, or it could be my Wind Waker Wii U. I don't really have any particularly expensive games. I think the most expensive games I have are just going to be Legend of Zelda, Mario games. And then I saw a hand in the, yeah, right there. So you said it's called what? Analog 3D, and you said that will be, okay, so this is a comment saying that there's a reproduction console coming out called the Analog 3D, and you said it will play N64 games. Great, so that's the answer to our question earlier. This is what I mean about community resources. Analog 3D reproduction console that will play N64 games. Any other questions? Yes. The question is, what is basically my current Holy Grail? So, because last year, my Holy Grail was this time last year, my Holy Grail was the GameCube promo disc for Legend of Zelda, but I got that at MAGFest last year. I have actually been on somewhat of a collecting pause for financial reasons. But right now, I think one of the three things I would like most in my collection would be either a Virtual Boy, a Power Glove, or Earthbound. You do? Fantastic. Who's selling a Virtual Boy for? Well, man, I can't go to St. Louis for that. I actually almost got a Virtual Boy for 200 that just needed a light resoldering, but then I got ghosted on that one. I was so sad. I think I saw another hand towards the back. Yes. The question was about scheduled maintenance of discs. Yeah, so about once a year, I'll spend a weekend taking out all of my consoles and all of my games, seeing which ones play easily. You know, usually I just have to do a couple of cleanings and then they play again. And then, you know, I just kind of go from there. I've never had an issue with any of my discs yet, knock on every material in existence. Discs are a little bit harder to fix because if you scratch off some of the code, or some of the programming and stuff, you might, it's kind of dead in the water. Does that answer your question? Great. Yes, red jacket. Yeah, that's a great question. The question was about games that are not mostly, how to collect games that are not mostly released in the US or released in Japan. So one thing to remember, first things first, is look into the console and look into if it has international capabilities. Early game consoles were region locked. Some you were able to do some sort of compatibility thing. So for example, for the GameCube, there is an international disc that you can buy. Basically, you put that in, you turn on the GameCube, then you, while it's on, take the disc out, put the Japanese game in. Yeah, it's crazy. So sometimes there's things like that. Other times there's things like the Nintendo versus the Famicom. There is nothing to do that you can do to make those compatible. Well, I lied. There is a compatibility, yes, thank you, converter. As far as collecting them, it has kind of been my experience that I have been able to find games from Japan pretty easily in my local video game store because they have a section dedicated to it. However, that does not describe every single video game store out there. I think some of your best bet will be online and on eBay, and that of course comes with the risks mentioned previously about eBay. Does that answer your question? Great. Yes, over here. Yes, you. The question was about online options other than eBay. The reason I usually recommend eBay is just because it has like it has its own system for collecting money and for shipping. Other options would include any sort of social media. I have bought and sold over Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok before. So I would say social media is kind of your next best bet. And also many video game stores have an online presence. I will say is don't buy from DK Oldies. It's really expensive. And I've got time for one more question. Yes. It is. Yes. So the question is, are there any peripherals that I really look for? And I'm going to amend my answer earlier to my holy grail. My holy grail is the Game Boy sewing machine. Seen it in person? I'm very jealous. Yeah, no, that's my actual. Yes, I want. There's that, and then there's also the Game Boy fishing sonar. That's a real thing. Unfortunately, my Nintendo History panel was not accepted this year, but I do talk about it. That is about all the time that we've got because we have to let the room get cleared and started for the next one. However, I will hang out for a couple of minutes, and I love talking about video games. Thank you all so much for coming to my panel. This was so much fun. Hopefully you learned something or thought about something in a new way. And if you do have any suggestions or anything you think would be really cool to cover, please let me know because I'm always looking for ways to upgrade. Thank you all again so much. Have a good rest of your fest.